All right, everyone, welcome to the Love Rising podcast. We have a very special guest with us today to talk about attracting a top quality relationship. James Rohr is with us today, and I will just read his quick little bio. James Rohr is a dating and relationship coach and acupuncturist. A graduate of Stanford University, he's had celebrity clients including Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade, has a published book called Unlearning Stress, and currently has a 12-week coaching program specifically for single women who need to up-level their dating life to attract a fantastic partner. And he is a good friend of mine's actual partner as well, so that's how we got connected. So I'm really happy to have him on, and I'm really excited to hear, we don't have that many men on the podcast, so I'm really excited to talk about this kind of relationship aspect of things with a guy. So we always like to start out with, what's your story? How did you get to do what you do? And also the other thing is, I would love to know how acupuncture and dating relationship coach kind of came together for you.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here. How do you get here? So I was first, it's a kind of a long story. Let me see what the highlights would be. I was first introduced to acupuncture when I was a teenager. I had some back pain from sports, and so this acupuncturist worked down the hall from my mom, and so that was my introduction to acupuncture. But around the same time, I had started seeing energy. I started having like really bizarre experiences where I was like sensing energy and seeing auras around people, and it was pretty intense as like a 15, 16-year-old to have that happen. And then when I went to college, I got very, very sick. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, depending on the diagnosis. And the acupuncture was the only thing that seemed to like alleviate some of the discomfort, but it didn't really fix it. And so I think part of why I went to acupuncture school is kind of twofold. One was like I wanted to try to understand like how to heal my body. And two is like a great expression for it was an opportunity to take the kind of the sensing of the energy that I was still experiencing and to give it some like structure and some format. And so that's how I kind of got into the acupuncture world. And one of the things that's amazing about acupuncture and Chinese medicine is that their theories of like understanding health and illness is that they look so much at what is the environment in which something is happening. And so if someone comes in with like a headache, we don't just say like, okay, I'm going to fix your headache. We ask a bunch of questions to be like, what's the context in which the headache is happening? Does it happen more in cold weather or hot weather? Does it matter what you eat, what you sleep, like what your stress is like? So we want to get a sense of all of the variables. And so in that kind of training and context, I quickly realized that relationships were like the most important variable in determining somebody's health. Well, diet is also really important, but if someone's relationship life sucks, then they're going to be more prone to eating bad food. And so, it wasn't long in my practice when I started realizing, whoa, like relationships are really where it's at. And if people aren't in good relationships, their health starts to deteriorate and everything else can start to really fall apart. And the research in the last 15 years that I've been in practice has really increased as well, where we see the damaging effects of loneliness, where loneliness is now, according to one study, like the single greatest mortality risk factor, even more so than obesity. It's like someone who's lonely is at a much higher risk for early death. And so, you lose out on the oxytocin, you lose out on the touch, you can have worse habits, people can make even more worse like financial decisions. So there's a lot of effects that can happen from that sense of loneliness. And with the way that my acupuncture practice has been, where it's kind of always been like dating coaching along the way, relationship coaching, because people come in, I pin them to the table, and then we just talk. And so in that conversation, I started to realize like, okay, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here, because the acupuncture is phenomenal and shifting someone's energy is great, but without giving them like the tools to navigate their relationships on an ongoing basis, all I would have them for is like an hour a week. But you start giving people the support to navigate dating relationships, taking radical accountability, overcoming fear, some of these mainstays, then all of a sudden their body can regulate itself better. Their body can start to heal itself. And one of the things that I'm kind of fanatical about is this idea of resilience. And acupuncture is great at, supporting the body's chi, the energy flow. And then when you increase, your ability to be in relationships, to navigate the dating world, especially in a good way, when your resilience is increased, everything just is so much easier.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's just more and more what we realize is that, everything's connected, and relationships, you could almost say, are our external environment. We're in relationship, not just romantic relationships, but in relationship with the barista. We're in a relationship with the checkout person. We're in a relationship with our families and everyone around us. And so it's like, if that external environment isn't conducive to healthy living, and just feeling good, then yeah, it definitely takes a toll on our physical body, on our emotional body, on our spiritual body, on our mental body, all of that stuff. Did you have a question, Kylee? I saw you unmute yourself.
No, I guess I was just going to say that when you were connecting with your patients, and you said you noticed that relationships were coming up most, and that when they were able to more navigate their relationships in a better way, their bodies were able to heal. Was it mostly romantic relationships, or do you find that it's really about just all the relationships, so even your friendships and things like that as well?
Yeah, great question. So it is definitely all relationships. And that's part of why I love working with dating clients, is because when you're like in that relationship, like if you have a date that's like, that didn't go well, it's not as nuanced as like people that have been together for 5 or 10 or 15 years. It's like, if like somebody doesn't text you back and like somebody freaks out, it's clearly that reaction is like your own. But in navigating like how you relate to new people, we get to look at all of the other relationships. So with work with my clients, like, we're talking about, what is your relationship to intimacy? What is your relationship to yourself? And then of course we're going to look at, friendship stuff comes up, parents come up, sibling stuff comes up. And that's like one of the most rewarding things, is that, hopefully people find and attract that amazing, romantic partner. But along the way, you see all these other relationships get better. One of the things that really kind of juices me is that when people say, oh, hey, stuff that used to trigger me doesn't trigger me anymore. Or, my coworker said this thing, and normally I would have like freaked out or had like anxiety for days, and I wasn't triggered at all. I felt really calm and peaceful. Or, like my in-laws came to town, or I had to go, spend a week with my family. And normally that would just send me into a panic, and I felt like myself and authentic. That's the thing that like, just, I get so excited about. There's a motto that I share with my clients all the time, which is to be able to go anywhere, be with anyone, and feel however you want to feel. And so when you're no longer like, when your feelings are no longer at the mercy of the people around you, but you get to dictate the terms, and you get to dictate what your energy is like, that's powerful with your friendships, with groups of friends, with family. And then of course on dates, where, you're not letting your sense of self-esteem or self-worth or your mood be dictated on whether or not somebody texts you back.
Yeah, that's so good. So really this journey kind of starts with us, right?
For sure. Yeah.
And I know our listeners have heard that before, and we all know this, but it's good to be reminded of that. So how do we start to kind of flip that mentality of kind of externally, like, what are they thinking, or why didn't I get that text back? And how do we become more at peace within ourselves so that we can like have those relationships and have those healthy relationships?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm sure you guys do a lot of this work with your clients as well. The place that I like to start, because I haven't figured out any way to start anywhere else, is taking radical accountability, coming from that place of just total ownership, where, it's like we talked about, paying attention to the environment that you find yourself in. And so the question that I ask for my clients all the time is, well, what's the environment that you're creating? What is it like to interact with you? What is it going to be like for that person on the other side of that table to be talking to you? What is it like to get a text back from you? One of my clients was worried because she said that the tone of how this guy was texting her had changed. But she had also been sick. She'd also been not feeling well. She was also like totally in her anxiety state. because she started to like this guy. And so I was like, she sent me screenshots of the text exchange, and I was like, listen, what you're texting is also kind of like low level energy. Like, you're not really giving this guy a whole lot to work with. And so if you want a high energy interaction, like, you got to bring that high energy. Otherwise, again, you're still kind of at the mercy of like what somebody else is doing. And so taking that kind of radical ownership is a phenomenal place to start.
I love that. I love radical responsibility and talking about that. One question I have is just, what is a top quality relationship, if you want to use that verbiage, or like what does a really quality relationship look like, would you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. What does a top quality relationship look like? It's going to be a little bit different for everybody. So I had a client who had been, she was an acupuncture client, and she just celebrated her 50th wedding anniversary. And I was like, how did you do that? And she said two things that were great. She was like, she's like, well, first of all, like, we just didn't want to both be divorced on the same day. She's like, so the days that I told him I wanted to divorce him, he was like, no, that's not allowed. And then the days that he said he wanted to divorce me, I was just like, no, it's not going to happen, And you can imagine how, like, if both people are in that same spot on the same day, then all of a sudden these proceedings get started, where you're hiring attorneys and stuff. And so I love that, of like, we both didn't want to be divorced. But she also said, she's like, the marriage that I wanted may be different than the marriage that you want, and that kind of relationship. So ultimately, it's getting clear on what exactly it is that you want. What is it that you're looking for? And for me, like, when I started, when my marriage ended and I was getting back out into the dating world, the number one thing that I was focused on was kindness. And I think that kindness is an attribute that is, should be like at the top of everybody's list, because relationships can be difficult. It's like it's not always super easy. And so for me, like, somebody who was kind and who like could quickly come back to kindness pretty quick, like sooner rather than later, was a great thing. And then also to someone who's willing to take accountability, someone who's willing, when things get a little weird, to just be like, ooh, like, hey, I recognize that I brought this into it, probably could have done that different. And that all the sort of conflict is handled in an energy of kindness. People that look for relationships where they're like, we never fight. My response to that is like, well, you guys aren't talking about the truth then.
Yes.
It's not about not fighting. It's about how is the fighting happening, and can you come back to that kindness? Can you always have these heated conversations with an energy of consideration for each other? And it's when there's that lack of consideration, that lack of respect, that I think is a problem. So if I had to sum it up, what is a high quality relationship? It's probably one where, there's a mutual respect at all times. And I think that if people are bringing that to each other, then that's a great place to start.
Yeah,
I'd be curious what you think about it. I mean, how would you guys, not to flip the roles here, but curious what you guys how you would define like a high quality relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I like your definition for sure. I think that is something that, but that again, we also have to take radical responsibility for, because if you're sitting there listening to this and being like, yeah, I need a kinder partner, I need someone, it's like, well, when are you not kind? When are you not very quick to kind of like have that elastic band come back to kindness, come back to respect, come back to consideration of that other person. I think, and this is really hard place to get to, and it's definitely, I'm not there, but I think a top quality relationship, like the goal, I guess, for me is that, it's that really cliche Kahlil Gibran poem, which was read at my wedding, which is read at like so many weddings, on marriage. The one where it's like, there's two people and they're kind of in parallel lives, right? So it's like, can we respect the other person when they have a differing opinion? Like, can we grow in parallel? I think that's a top quality relationship to me, is that, two people on their own growth trajectories, and kind of, leaning on each other when they need to, but really letting the other person grow in their own way. and respecting that, and like absolutely having a partner through that to like bounce ideas off of, to support you when you're feeling really unsupported, all of that stuff. But like really allowing, I almost have like a picture of bubbles, right? It's like I have my bubble and my husband has his bubble, and I will go over to his bubble if he asks me to. But for the most part, we are standing in our own bubbles, right? We're not kind of like in this convoluted cloudiness where both of our bubbles are the same bubble. I don't know if that makes, that's like a metaphor, but that's what I kind of think of, is like two people growing on the same track parallel to each other.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's great. I think that's great. I mean, part of the mistake that I think people make is that they just expect everything to be easy, and it's like what you were saying reminded me of like, when someone discovers their truth, right? This is like something that I see a lot, and I see it a lot with people who, singles who are like in their mid to late 30s, early 40s, who've lived, right? They've been through some shit. They've had like their hearts broken. They've been with a narcissist or a sociopath. And so they get to this place of their truth, and they're like, I know my truth. And it's like, I started asking questions around it, and their truth is really, it's like, it's more like a barrier, or it's more like hurdles to be like, bested, or hoops to be jumped through. And, so one of the things that I think is important with these good relationships is like that your truth is an invitation. It's an invitation to intimacy, instead of like, a wall that has to be climbed in order to like prove that somebody is worth it. And so, even when people are in relationships, that idea of like your separate bubbles and that kind of growth, it's like, I've seen a lot where, certainly with the acupuncture practice, where people discover acupuncture, maybe they've discovered yoga, they've done some self-help retreats and workshops, and they've been in a relationship for 5 or 10 years, and all of a sudden they're having this kind of like awakening, and their purpose starts to veer from how it was when they first got married, and then what can happen is that their resentments can pile up because their spouse, usually the husband, right, isn't like on board. He doesn't understand it, and it's like it's all new. And there can be like, the resentments can pile up very, very quickly. And one of the things that I say to them often is like, hey, this new truth has to be like, you have to invite your husband in to experience this new opportunity, this new lifestyle, this new way of being. And it may take some time, and it may be a little rocky along the way, because he's got to like reshift his imagining of you and what the future together looks like. But if you just use your kind of like your newfound spiritual truth as a way just to kind of like poke and prod and try to get your way, like that's not helpful. That's not an invitation to kindness and to growth.
Yeah, I think that the way that I would see it, I guess, is that you're almost two complete individuals that really just like hold each other up and support one another, and you're not really like almost trying to leak each other and like, oh, this is going to fill my hole and that'll fill your hole. And it's like, and so for me, that's really my mindset. But I think that what you brought up is so important, that it's like, as it's almost like this, I don't know if this is the right word, but self-righteousness of like, this is where I'm growing and I'm expanding, but they, like you said, don't invite. So where they need you in this relationship, you need to remember that if you're two whole, complete people, you're going to support one another and lift one another up. And of course there's going to be questions, and of course there's going to be adjustments and growing. But I think that can be, it comes down to a lot of communication, which I think a lot, and maybe you can answer this, is that's what's lacking in a lot of relationships too.
For sure. Communication is, I mean, it's a must. I mean, it's first and foremost. And communication, in particular, coming from that place of that total accountability. Because a conversation where somebody is speaking in I statements, and where they're speaking of, this is what I experienced, this was how I experienced you, this is how you occurred to me, this is what I felt, this is what I saw, is a totally different type of conversation than like, you were a piece of shit, and like, you always leave your, the dishes in the sink, and you never do this. It's like, it's easy to come up with a laundry list of, ways that you're upset at somebody. But taking that radical accountability and starting to speak from that place, just, it makes the whole interaction so much more healthier.
Yeah, I like this idea, or I'm intrigued by this idea of the fact that as people get older, they kind of start to build, it's almost like they build walls around themselves. You know, it's like, well, this happened to me and I don't want that to happen again. And this happened to me and I don't want that to happen again. And like what we need instead when we're attracting a top quality relationship is to have that, those truths be an invitation instead of a wall. I love that. Can you maybe, I guess, expand on that more, or also maybe some real life examples of what that wall looks like and what people are, you know, just explain like why people are trying to do that. Obviously they're trying to protect themselves. Does that make sense as a question?
Sure. Yeah. So have you guys read the book Attached? Have you ever seen this book? It's
No.
it's a phenomenal, I mean, I think it's the best dating book that's out there. And it looks at attachment